We're now moving on to Chapter 3. The focus of this chapter is working with CSS and integrating it into your project using some of the really cool tools that are available inside of Visual Studio. The goal here is not for me to teach you about CSS on its own. There is an assumption that you guys have had a bit of a background in that. If your skills are weak, you might want to consider looking at some outside resources. W3 Schools would be a good place to start, maybe lynda.com, or look at some of your old textbooks, just to kind of refresh your memory as to how CSS functions. CSS is absolutely a very key part of designing web pages. The CSS stands for, that's right, Cascading Style Sheet. Can you give me in a nutshell what they do? What does CSS do? Say that again. Styles of, like what I'm wearing? Okay, I'm hearing a lot of different words. I mean, you're styling your text, your images, you're doing formatting, controlling layout, you're doing a lot of different things with CSS. It basically controls all the visual elements. And we're going to start stepping away from these really ugly, plain-looking pages to pages that have structure, they're using something other than the default font. There's backgrounds, there's images, and all those are controllable through CSS. All right. Why do you need CSS? Well, it's pretty simple, because HTML on its own does not look very well. It does not look very good. Excuse me. In the old days, we had some really rudimentary tags that we would play with, tags that looked like this, where we would declare the font as kind of like an HTML tag. Those days are long gone. You will never do that. But formatting through HTML itself was very problematic, very inconsistent. Not to mention we had all these different browsers that would handle it in different ways. So they've come up with a set of rules now that most of the browser manufacturers are on board with at this point in time, thankfully, where we can code stuff in one platform using one tool, move it to any other browser or platform, and it should look the same. That's really the goal. And things are really close to that now, where if you can get it usually to look good, let's say in Chrome, it'll tend to look good in just about every browser. The most notable exception is like older versions of Internet Explorer, so that's something you want to be aware of, and there's actually little workarounds for that we're going to learn as we move forward. CSS, like HTML, has gone through its versions. It's currently on version 3 point something, and they constantly add new features to it, and I think they're planning for a major version upgrade in the next few years. That doesn't mean that the stuff that you know now is going to change, but they'll probably add new features, and that's typically what they do, or refine the way the features work. Let's go ahead and go to the folder where our work is located. If you were following from the previous video, I went ahead and closed out my project and saved everything. So inside of Visual Studio right now, which is running, I do not have anything open. The reason I did that is so that I can go to my file folder, and like I did with the previous video, I'm actually going to make a copy of my work in progress, and then I'm going to paste it back into the same folder. And then once again, I'm going to right-click and rename. And then I'm going to just name that Chapter 2 Complete. Now, what's cool about that, of course, is now I can start Chapter 3 as many times as I want, and Chapter 2 is already done. So I have a clean slate to start from and a backup to go to. All right, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to go ahead and open the website. If you have the start page up in Visual Studio in the center, you can close it, and then just simply come up here and say Open, Website, and if you've stayed consistent with your folders and following the folder copying that I'm doing, it should be right on the same folder. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Open, and all my stuff comes right back up, even the same files that I had open before in the same spot, which is handy, can be. All right, I'm going to be moving my book off to the second screen here. Still reading from it. And the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to come up to the demos folder, and I recommend you click on it just to highlight it, and then give it a right click. And we're going to add another new web form. So I'm going to do add web form, and this one's going to be entitled CSS Demo. And hopefully you've created it with the code behind. Should do it automatically. They're indicating in the book that it actually doesn't really matter if it's code behind or not, but the general practice here is that you should always shoot for code behind. They want you to make sure that you are in code view, not design view. And they want you to find the title tag, and in between the head tags but below the title tags, you want to add a style element. In your book, they do also include this attribute. Oops. I want to let the tool do it itself. So see, I'm forcing the tool to do it for me. A down arrow, highlight it, and press enter. Previous versions of HTML, current version being HTML5, required that you included that attribute to ensure that all the browsers understood that you were sending style information to the browser. That is not required anymore. If you want to make sure that it's backwards compatible, you throw it in. But you see, Visual Studio did not care when I put it did not force it in. If you're using the older version of Visual Studio, it probably will throw it in. So if you got, maybe even 2013 still throws it in, but 2012 and 2010 for sure throw that in. Now, of course, you guys are all HTML experts at this point, so you know that all the styles that we're going to create that are going to be related to this page are going to go inside that area. All right, so one thing that they want us to play with is to type in some code from our book, and I'm going to let you guys type it in if you want, or you can do what I'm about to do. Is I just went over to the textbook, highlighted it, and if you guys want to watch that exciting process, so yeah, I highlighted it. This is the PDF version of the text, and I did a Control-C to copy, and then I'm just bringing it right back over here and dropping it in on line 9 in between the style tags. Now, it doesn't look as pretty, the layout, right? But I can do a right click after I've highlighted all that text and format selection, and it puts it into properly styled CSS. Please note that we don't have anything on the page left yet to style, right? We're just putting in the styles in advance. And this format for adding CSS, of course, is called embedded style sheet, meaning it's added to the file itself. And that's not necessarily considered the best practice, but we already discovered in the previous chapter that sometimes when you make choices from those design menus, it creates an embedded style and puts it right into the document. And this is also to show you that you can still code in this fashion if you prefer. Remember, the optimum way to do it, of course, is to keep your CSS in a separate file and link to it, which we will learn shortly. Now, what's kind of fun is that you play with some of this stuff. So notice here that we have the color green put in. Like if you guys were typing in the color tag, and this is one of the things they're trying to show you, notice type in color, press the colon, and right after I type that, it automatically brings up a menu. And if you notice from that menu, you can kind of see embedded into that list, hey, there's a whole bunch of colors in here. Not only are there colors, but they also have a little box next to them that shows you what the color actually is. And then if I also follow this by typing a £, it assumes that I'm looking for colors. And notice it brings up, some primitive colors. But notice the drop down. If you click that, it actually brings up a color palette. And you can come in here and choose the basic color, the value of that color, if it's grayish or dark or bright or whatever it happens to be. If you want, you can also change the opacity. And notice as I was moving around the screen here, how it changes the color code. And then if I decide that I want my color to be a little see-through, I can start changing that. Notice how it changed from the hex value for the color to the RGBA value for the color, which we talked about in Web 1, with the last number being the opacity. So you can see when I move the opacity slider, how the opacity number changes automatically. That's pretty slick. But if I don't have any opacity in there, it resorts back to the hex value. But if you want to invoke the color palette, the way you do it is by typing a £, after a style selector that can do color, basically. In this case, color, of course, refers to the color of the font. So the color of the text inside of H1 will be this hideous shade of green. All right, the next step, which is step 4, they need us to add some stuff to the page so that we can actually style it. Like we put in the styles, but we don't have anything to style. So I'm copying the contents from step 4, and I'm inserting them right here in between the two div tags. And if you look, oops, I guess it didn't copy. Let me make sure it's copied. And it should look something like this. Once again, the paste wasn't very clean. But I'm going to highlight that, and then I'm going to right-click and format selection, and it cleans it up for us. And notice then we do have an H1, we have a plain old paragraph, and we have a paragraph that's got a class called right aligned. And then if you want to refer back to the styles that we're working with, there's your H1, there's your paragraph, and there's your right aligned. Remember, when you're dealing with classes, things that have a class attribute, the way that you apply a CSS style by name is by using the class name, but it's got to be prefaced with a period. Tags that are native to HTML don't need any special denotation. If I happen to have, let's say, an ID on this paragraph of ID equals whatever it happens to be, how would I create a style for it here? Right. So you would preface it with a £, if it's an ID. And remember with IDs, I'm sorry? Yep, classes are dots, IDs are £. ID elements can only occur once on a page, so they have to be unique. Classes can be used multiple times. But that's how I would create a style for that, and then I would, throw in whatever is appropriate in that situation. I'm not going to be doing that right now, so I'm Control-Zing my way out of the whole thing by pressing Control-Z repeatedly. Okay, so we're back to where we were. I'm going to save my work. All right. What I want you to do next, before you go bringing it up in your browser, is I just want you to take a look at the design view. And then notice I also took my mouse and I clicked off of any of the content. Because before I came in here, my mouse was somewhere. And then when I switch to that design view, it puts me where my mouse was. But I want to be out of there, partially so I can see the results of the CSS. Now, this is primitive CSS, and this design view will show you the results of that primitive CSS just fine. When you get to some of the more advanced stuff, it might not. In fact, it can kind of assure you that it won't, especially when you do more advanced layout things and when you're looking at advanced CSS features like text shadow and some of those types of things. But sure enough, now you can see that the styles did apply. The styles, just to refresh your memory here, says that H1s should be 20 pixels in size and have this weird green color that we picked. All paragraphs should be blue in italic, and then anything that has the class of right aligned should be text aligned right. Okay? And that's actually kind of a clever style naming technique, folks. And that's a technique I would always use. I would create little things that, okay, make the text red, so I would call the style, red. And that way when I apply the class, I knew exactly what it was doing. All right, so that's the result of it. And really what you should do at this point is actually bring it up in your browser. So hit the play button and just see that it did indeed work like that in the browser. And of course, you can close that and go back to Visual Studio and hit the old stop button and bring back all your menus. So that completes the exercise up through page 70. And then what the book does is it starts walking us, through how CSS works. I'm hoping nobody is confused by that process right now, but the way that a quick refresher, maybe in terms of at least terminology, is the thing that you're using to select your CSS style is called a selector. So that can be based on the tag name, a class or an ID, or what we call pseudo-selectors. Pseudo-selectors are something you should have learned about a little bit, but we are going to play with a couple of them here in this chapter. Once you actually have that selector in place, opening and closing curly brackets, and then little style declarations. So each style declaration will have some sort of a property it's trying to affect, like the font size. There's a colon, and then the value for that actual thing that you're styling, and then each statement should be terminated with a semicolon. Hypothetically, well, not hypothetically, in actuality, the very last statement in a CSS statement doesn't need the semicolon, but you should put it in anyhow. And the author of the book does that. So, all right. Now he goes through and he explains how this all works. Once again, I'm making that assumption that you understand. One that you might not be aware of, depending on who taught you your CSS to begin with, is this little selector, which is just an asterisk. What does that do? Yeah, right. It's a universal selector, it says right here, and it applies to all elements on your page. So if you wanted to use the same font for your whole page, you can do it like this. So you can apply it to every element by just using that particular tag. And that can be a handy little tool. And there's a lot of scenarios where you might want to use that. All right, talk about ID selectors, class selectors, and also a little reminder here that you can also apply styles to multiple selectors simultaneously by just simply separating them with a comma. So the color red would apply to H1s, H2s, H3s, H4s, it would apply to all of those. And sometimes that's handy if you have that situation. Another thing that you often see is a kind of a combination of selectors, and you're going to see here that we have section. So yes, there's an HTML tag called section, and inside section, look for something that's got a ID of main content. So once you found that thing in section that's got the ID of main content, then look for a paragraph inside of it. That's what this says. This is syntax you might not have seen. At most, you might have seen maybe everything after the pound sign. Or maybe you saw something like UL space LI, which says a list item inside of a UL, which is different than UL, comma, list item. And there's a difference between those. But this is considered a really good way to tunnel down and get a very specific selector. And then let's take it even a step farther. So not just a paragraph inside of a section ID main content, but a paragraph with the class of attention. Now, purists would say, why can't I just go dot attention and be done with it? You can. But sometimes you don't want to apply it to everything that's got the class of attention, but only to a very specific one. So that's why you use very specific syntax. All that logic is really kind of up to you and how you're structuring your pages. So, all right, they give you an example of very common CSS styles. They show you how all the different values, we just played with these color values. And you saw how the tool automatically works with that. The other little refresher you should have with CSS is some of these combination styling approaches, where here they're giving the example of working with the border tag, and the border style basically has like all these different things you can do. Border, width, style, and color for each individual sides of the box. Remember, every HTML element basically has a box around it, so I could put a border all the way around, or I could just put the border on one side or two sides, and I can style them all differently. But what they're showing you here at the top is that if you want to style this thing with a 1 pixel solid black border going all the way around, you can use this shorthand syntax. In a lot of HTML elements that deal with multiple parameters have a shorthand version. The font tag, or the font style, is one of them, for example. Like you could declare the font face, whether it's bold, and the size, all in one statement, just saying font, if you know the right syntax. So that's kind of a handy thing. All right, here's the CSS box model. This is something you guys need to kind of internalize because it does become completely assumed as you get to higher levels of doing web work. But everything that you put on the page, any element, whether it's text or an image or whatever it is, has the element itself. There's a border, margin, and padding that are always there that behave differently depending on what the tag is. If you use something like an H1, that has some built-in padding that goes with it. There's a little bit of space above and below. It's automatic. There's no border, right? But that padding doesn't always exist. So like if I use like a div tag, which is a generic element, it has none of that. But to any of those elements, I can add a border, I can add padding, and I can add margin. And the real key of working with these elements is that they add possibly to the size of the object as you're starting to place it on the page, and that's really why I'm mentioning it here. So if I have an element that's a specific size and I had a border that's 2 pixels, that 2 pixels gets added to the height and the width. In fact, if those 2 pixels go all the way around, I'm adding 4 to the height and 4 to the width because there's 2 on either side, right? And then if I decide to add padding, padding exists in between the border and the element, so it necessitates that it makes the element larger. So if I have padding of 10 pixels all the way around, that's adding 20 pixels vertically and horizontally, right? Margins do not affect the size of the object, but do affect the placement of the object and the flow of the document. And that sometimes drives people crazy, especially when you're trying to get things to lay a certain way. You're like, why is I put like a margin of 100 and it's not moving? And that's because it doesn't change the size of anything, and it still tries to float into wherever it needs to be. All right. So that's just a quick refresher on the box model. Once again, if you guys are weak in your CSS skills or you need a refresher, go to W3 Schools, go to lynda.com, pull out your old textbook, and just play with it. Simple as that. All right, so we're going to go into Visual Studio now and move the book off to the second screen. And the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to open up our home page. In fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close all my open pages, even if that one I'm looking for is already open, just so we get them out of the way. So they want us to go to this file, default ASPX, the one that's in the root of the site. Open that up, and they want us to go ahead and it says modify the code within the form element so it ends up like this. Now, I want you to be very careful, because what's happening here, I'm going to pull the book back over just so that you don't end up typing ... Whenever you look at a coding book and you see something that's ... what does that mean? Yeah, there's more code here, we're just not typing it all. That does not mean you type ... Really what they're telling you is, see the stuff in the section tag? Oh, mine doesn't even look like that, does it? Well, I'm going to be copying some code here for sure. But my stuff is not inside these tags, so I'm going to rebuild it. So if you guys are following along with me, I'm going to help you fix it, basically. But there's some additional things that are going into the mix. So I'm going to be really careful here about how I do this by grabbing, let's see if I can get my cursor to cooperate. I'm going to grab the bolded text, copy it, I'm going to paste it in right here at line 17. Don't worry about the formatting, we'll clean that up in a second. And then after this paragraph here, probably right down here on line 27, we go back to the book and I'm going to grab the remainder. And I see one mistake that I already made. And notice now I'm going to highlight this bottom closing div tag, and I'm going to get rid of that. And this top one here, now you can see it underlines. I'm getting rid of that. So really there should be, the goal is to basically get it in this structure, so directly inside that form tag is a div tag ID page wrapper that closes right before the form tag. So I'm just trying to make sure that it's identical. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight that whole section of code here. Once again, I'm going to do the right click, format selection, just to make it look nice. And hopefully your version ends up looking like this. So if yours is not looking like this, what I would suggest that you do is just pause the video here in this spot and just make sure it does. Okay. Remember, I have my word wrap turned on and line numbers turned on. So if you don't have that going on, it's going to look more like this, something like that. But I like people to be able to see what I'm coding here. So get your code into that position. All right, next thing you want us to do, well, we should probably save this so we don't lose it. So click back in, save. And then they want us to open up the style sheet in the styles folder. Remember that? So give that a double click, open it up. And it says here that we added some code to this file earlier. I don't have that for some reason, but that's okay because we're going to clear it out anyhow. So you might have some, I don't. And I'm going to add what they have. So they want us to add a header, put in the curly brackets, and then I'm just leaving it like that. Now, this does not have a pound sign or a period in front of it, so it's not a class and it's not an ID. This is for the HTML5 native tag called header. We don't have that on the page yet, but we will be adding that. Next thing it says is position your mouse in between the curly braces, right click, and choose Build Style from the context menu. Okay, try it. Okay, hopefully it didn't take you this long to figure out that's not there. So this is one of these tools that we cannot invoke from the right-click menu like you could in Visual Studio 2012, which was the version that was used to write this book. So if you're using 2013, 15, or beyond, you will not have that visible. So guess what? You can't do this part. Not like this, at least. So we have to resort to other methods. Does anybody know where I can find that in the menus? Has anybody figured it out? Pretty sure it's in Tools. So where are we going to see that? View, Toolbox? Tools. Okay, let's make it a challenge question and see if you can find it. I'll pause the video for a moment. All right, it's not necessarily easy to find because they've removed this tool from being present from within a style sheet from a right click. Okay, so here's the trick. Go to your document and switch to Design View. Find the element that you're going to style, then go up to the Format menu and do New Style. Here's our problem. We don't have that element on our page yet that we want to style. So, but this is how you get to the tool. So if you hit the New Style tool, it brings up that box that you see. Now, it doesn't matter what element that we're on. The truth is we can come in here and we can change the selector that we're working with right from this dialog box. So that is what we're going to do. And this is actually a little bit different than the modify style that you see in the book because it includes this section up at the top. Repeat this tool. Okay, this one's the New Style tool. In the book, I'm going to pull the book back over, notice that the tool that they're invoking is called Modify Style. And if you look at it real carefully, all the stuff in here is actually in here too. It just doesn't include the stuff up at the top. This is the tool that we use to create a brand new style without typing it in. And it has all that stuff present. But since they're working from the standpoint that the style already exists, see, because it's in the style sheet, therefore you could right click and modify. But since we don't have that tool available, we have to go in to the design view, click Format, New Style, and then we can choose any style that we want to modify, including ones that pre-exist. Now, one thing that you should be aware of here, and I'm going to cancel out again, is that the style sheet is not saved yet. So I'm going to save it. Does that give us the right-click option? No. But we can go back to Design View, Format, New Style, and then do that. Now, here's the little thing that's kind of weird. Because that style sheet right now that we're working with isn't linked to the document yet. And the book is kind of going out of sequence in that regard. So that might be one of the reasons why it feels a little uncomfortable, but just kind of see past that for right now. There's a reason why they're pushing you this way, and one of the reasons is basically we're going to be able to create that link to that style sheet with a simple drag and drop. Cheating, right? Everybody's like, "Oh, that's cheating. I don't even have to remember how to type it." No, but it creates the situation where you don't make a mistake in creating the link, which is a problem that a lot of people have, especially if they're not familiar with the syntax. So I'm actually going to cancel out of here, and I'm going to go back to the instructions, and I'm going to kind of zoom ahead here a little bit to try to get to the point where we are going to create that new style manually here, and then we're going to get it to our style sheet separately. Now, the one thing that you can do, frankly, is if you look at step 7 of this exercise, you can just take that code, this code, and I'm just going to paste it in, and just drop it into the document. Right, same basic thing. And the way that they created it is they just did it with all the different checkboxes here. So just to show you how that process works, once again, we're going to go back to the document, format, new style, and in this case, we are actually going to choose the HTML tag. So you can see it should be here on the list. There's header. And in this case, it says define in current page. But the truth is, we're going to want it to be in an existing style sheet, right? Okay, so we got to be careful. I already know that this is going to cause a little bit of an issue because I already have the code in there. So please see past that. Okay, so I'm going to choose the header selector in an existing style sheet. And where is that? In the styles folder. There's the style sheet. Click OK. Automatically finds the file. And then we're going to go through and make the same selections that they did in the book. And the selections were, we're going to go to background. So on the left-hand side here, in the category, and they have a color pre-selected, and if you know your styles, they basically chose like a gray. And you can type in # CO. I just happen to know it's one of the standard colors in the palette, so there you go. The other thing that we're going to do is we are going to do a couple of other options here. We're going to go to the position category, and we're going to set the width. They have it all figured out, so we go with their numbers to 844 pixels, and we're going to set the height to 86 pixels. Also notice that once you have styles placed in any one of the categories, how those are emboldened, so you know that, hey, there's stuff in here you should look at, by the way. All right. The next thing they want you to do is basically they want you to go through and add the remaining styles which appear in step 8 in the book. So you could just, if you want, you could go through and copy paste them in like I'm about to do, or you can use that interface to drop them in. Right now I'm not going to use the interface to finish off the work. I'm actually just going to click OK, and then I'm going to go back to the style sheet. You see how the style sheet is not saved now? And see how it just duplicated what I did? It wasn't smart enough to recognize it shouldn't do that, but that's not really a big deal. I can just delete that. And then what you should do, folks, is just do what I'm doing. If you want to play with the tool, go for it. Instead, if you want to just get this done a little bit more efficiently, which that's my objective here, is I'm going to copy paste this in from the book in increments. Once I can get my mouse positioned properly. You're not seeing it off on the second screen here, but PDFs, for whatever reason, aren't always very elegant at copy pasting. So I'm grabbing all the other stuff. So I got that's the stuff from page 81, and then this is the stuff from the top of page 82. And then I'm going to do a Control A to select everything. Right click, format selection, and then it cleans everything up. And then what you really should do is you should go through and just take a really quick look at what we structured here. Now, in terms of the hierarchy of placing CSS, I usually like to take global elements and put them near the top. And then I usually structure my CSS, and you should be in some form of a habit. But my habit is that as the elements typically appear on the page, that's how I usually order them. and group them together. You don't have to. It doesn't matter where you put them as long as it can find them. Control S to save. Now, I'm hoping you guys recognize all these different things. Remember, my objective here is not to lecture you on CSS, but to get you guys to work on this. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back into our document here, and up at the very top of the document, we need to be able to tell this document that we're using that style sheet. Okay, so those of you that have been comfortable coding all your stuff by hand, right? So this is the page that I need the CSS. Here's my style sheet. Click, drag, drop. For some people, that's worth the price of admission alone, honestly. Okay, purists, oh, but you don't know how to type the code. Reality, it's faster and it's accurate. And, you know, if there's like, if it's embedded in folders and I need to do like a bunch of dot, slash, whatever, it does it automatically. So, you know, there's not cheating. It's making sure your work is right, and it really it's about improving workflow and speed of how you work. All right, go ahead, save your work again, Control S. All right, folks, we managed to make it down to the bottom of page 82. You can see I put a little highlight on step 11 here, just to indicate this is where we left off, and I do plan next week to probably pick up right here at this point and carry on. I do have videos from the past that are present that step you all the way through the rest of the chapter, so if you need to finish it off, you can go to those videos. They might have been recorded in a previous version of Visual Studio, but really the steps are essentially the same. So try to get the stuff done, and I'll see you in the next video.